March board meeting of the Milton Area School District. Could we have roll call, please?
Mr. Frederick?
Here.
Mr. Hosterman?
Here.
Mr. Hunt?
Here.
Ms. Kessler?
She is unable to make it this evening, Mrs. Kessler.
Mr. Moser?
Here.
Dr. Strasser?
Here.
Mr. Harris?
Here.
Dr. Weaver?
Here.
Mrs. Rance?
Here.
Thank you.
Could we all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we actually go into our budget presentation this evening, I'd like to ask a motion to go into executive. This is for personnel.
So moved.
Motion, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, signify aye.
Aye.
All right, obviously, we will have business to conclude when we come back. It should not be very long. Thank you for your patience. All in favor, signify aye.
Aye.
All right, now we can start our finance committee meeting with our budget presentation, and thank you all for your patience. Appreciate giving us that time. Mr. Frederick, you are up.
All right. I'll be looking to Mr. Fink to discuss the bond sale.
Oh, forgot about that. Yeah. Give me two. You know what? I can just do it from memory. The bond sale took place. Everything went really well. The rate came in better than projected. And what that'll end up meaning is that not within the first 2 years, that's going to look kind of like the projection. But after that, it's going to be about $20,000 less per year for the repayment than what we expected. So it's a positive. That's all good. I think it's March 29th is the settlement date. So that's when we actually see the money hit our account. So on March 29th, we will be fully funded for the Baca project as long as we stay within the budget that we've set for ourselves. So that all went as good as it could have gone.
So $20,000 less
Per year.
per year.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Good.
And so I think it adds up to like $700,000 less total interest over the life of the borrowing. So yeah, couldn't have asked for much better, especially given the rate environment that we're in right now. We made out really well. So, but let's not do it again for a while. I'm ready to put a pin in the borrowing for a bit.
Yeah.
I think we're good to go now.
That's good news.
Yep.
And that 20,000 begins in 24, 25.
Yes. It's still going to look as projected for 23, 24, but then 24, 25, we'll start to see that. And then we'll see it over the course of the years compared to the original projection.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep.
Any questions on that from anybody? All right, we're not going to leave Mr. Fink off the hot seat quite yet. In your packet, you should have a updated version of the preliminary budget. Derek, if you would maybe talk us through, I believe there's some additions and updates from the last time.
Yeah, I'll let everybody know what changed. So I did not make any changes to expenditures at all, because that's something that I know that you as a group would want to review. And that's something that we as a district have control over. So all of those are the same. So if you spend time looking through the budget, don't worry, that hasn't been changed. We will make changes based on your input tonight and going forward. What has changed though is the revenue section. So this is something I do regardless of a special meeting or if we pass the budget in February. Starting when the governor makes his budget address, I use that to help decide where we should project our state subsidies. So I went in and updated those. So I don't know if you guys caught the governor's budget address, but it was positive towards additional school funding. I think he was quoted as saying a 7.8% funding increase for PA public schools. We will not see 7.8%. That will get negotiated down, but it's a great starting point. So that means that if they negotiate it down to 3%, that's still a really good spot for us to be in. So
Let's think about 5.
I'd love the full 7.8. That would solve a lot of our problems. And so, but based on the strength of his presentation and where I feel like we'll end up, I did increase our basic education and special education subsidies slightly. So I did increase the revenue projections there. I also went in and fine-tuned the current local real estate tax numbers, and I gave you guys a new separate packet with those numbers, which we'll talk about And then the other areas I updated was earned income tax. I increased that because I wanted to see where our collections were at this point through the year, and we are doing really well again. This is like the third year in a row where we've had above expected returns on our earned income tax. So that's a really good thing to see. I increased our investment earnings by 100,000. When we made this budget last year, had no idea where investment rates would be, but we are doing really well. What I do is I track, we have multiple spots where we house our money, our liquid money that we have, and then I will move that to whoever has the highest rates during the week. And so as I've been moving those around, we've been getting a much better rate on a return, about right now, like $30,000 to $40,000 a month on our investments. Now that'll go down as we have to spend down our money, but we got a really good return on the tax collections that we house, and when we have a larger amount in our accounts. So that number was increased because I expect those rates to remain through next budget year. The Fed's projecting 2 additional interest rate increases for the federal rate. So it means that rates are likely to stay higher through the next year, and then they may tail off after that. And then our event emissions, I increased that. Now, some of that may just be had a ton of people coming out because of the new stadium, but overall we have more events, we have more people coming out. That amount of money that's coming in has increased a significant amount, especially coming off of COVID when there was 0. So I did increase that as well. So those are the changes I made in the revenues, but overall it boosted it a decent amount. So you'll be able to see that, and it puts the current deficit without touching expenditures at about 2.3 million, which isn't far off from what we were looking at before, but it's still an improvement overall. So that's the revenue side. The other piece that I will talk about is just I wanted to touch again on local tax projections and make sure that you guys all have this sheet in front of you. So the revenues are projected with what's allowable, the full allowable increase for us. So Dwayne, I don't know if you want to present the one that says local tax projections, but it's this sheet. It's a separate packet. You guys should all have it. But I did it a little bit differently this year. Typically, what I've done in the past is a breakdown of 25% of the Act 1 index, 50% of the Act 1 index, 75% of the Act 1 index, and then a full Act 1 index increase. It hit me this morning that it makes a lot more sense for us as a district with multi-county and how different they are, and the fact that we have to balance based on revenue growth, to just present you guys 3 options that's based on revenue growth, but goes to basically what's the highest revenue growth we can have, which is capping at the Act 1 index, which is the 5.6%. And that would be the far right column that says revenue increase cap. So you can see for Northumberland County and Union County how much that maximum increase would impact the median homeowner. And then you can also see the impact that has for the Milton area school district and our revenues. So I'll start with that because that's what's in that budget book that we have, and it's what we've had before. So current millage is 72.3 for Northumberland. The millage increase going up to the full index, so the cap would be 4.04 mils, bringing us to 76.34 mils. That's 5.6% increase in mills. So that's where the Act 1 index comes in. That's the highest we can go for any increase of mills. So that for a median homeowner in Northumberland County would be $6.41 more per month than they're paying now. So about half of our taxpayers in Northumberland County would pay $6.41 or less more per month for their taxes. And then Union County, like we talked about before, because they had a large total assessed value increase, regardless of what we decide to do as a district, they are going to see a tax decrease, even if we go to the Act 1 index. So for them, 17.7 going down to 17.51, which is a 0.19 mil reduction. That's negative 1.1%. The median home value there is 107,950. So about the median homeowner would see about $1.71 less per month for their taxes if we go to the full Act 1. So what does that mean for the district? So for the district, it means we'd see our local net tax revenue grow from the previous year by about $889,000. So it's an interesting year where we got benefited by an increased assessed value, where we can look at increasing taxes, but not having a huge negative impact for our tax base while still growing our overall year over year revenue. So to go from there and back it up, the previous two columns show mid-level growth. So like what's right in the middle. And that's based on the revenue. So that's based on what the Milton Area School District would gain from the previous year. So you have to remember that that goes into the state provided formula for recalculation, recalibration, equalizing the taxes. So when you look at the millage change percentage, that number is not going to be dead set in the middle because there's more than that that impacts our total revenue growth. So that middle column though is what would get the district our medium level growth. So basically, you know, where can we increase our revenue halfway towards the max amount? And then that first column would be if we didn't change anything from our revenue growth from our current year, that's what it would look like. So to truly match our revenue collected from tax collection from 22, 23 to 23, 24, both counties would actually get a tax decrease because they did see assessed values go up. Even Northumberland saw a small increase in assessed values. So that's kind of the general recap that I had. I wanted to share, as I always do, kind of the breakdown, and we can go anywhere in the middle. Like, you know, you guys can say, you know, what we really want to see is, you know, the school being able to get $750,000. Where would that put us for taxpayers? And I can run all of those numbers. You know, it's just easiest for me if we pick 3 points and kind of work within those numbers. So any questions on that before I just touch on one additional slide page graph that I have? Okay. So the other one is just a colored bar graph. I just wanted to share this. This is just for informational purposes, but what I was able to do now, 2021 is the most recent year where I had this full data available to us from all the districts. But I wanted to just kind of share what it costs per student for each district. And so what we're looking at is when we take out facilities acquisition and construction, and the reason I did that is because in 2021, there was some strange outliers where like we put $2 million into HVAC that went through our general fund because of COVID relief. I felt that didn't provide an accurate representation of what the school district spend per student. So I pulled that out. And this gives you an idea of what districts are paying per student to attend their buildings. So I put the dotted line across right at the peak of Milton, so you can see which districts fall above us per student and which districts fall below us. I'll point out Warrior Run because it sticks out like in a major way. That yellow bar is like repayment of debt. So that'd be like bond repayment, things like that. I know they had a big project. I can't speak for their budget, but they must have, for some reason, worked that through their general fund and not through their capital projects fund. So like all our stuff for that kind of thing would fund through our Fund 39. I'm not sure why they have that weird outlier. So just look at their yellow bar and maybe cut that by 90%. And that's probably more accurate for Warrior Run. They're not spending $40,000 per student. But otherwise, again, like I said, I wanted to just share that to give you guys an idea of where we fall on our per student spending. I mean, there's only a couple districts in our area that come in below us. I think that we do a pretty good job of maximizing our resources overall. And that's all I have as far as like a general recap. Obviously, I will answer any and all questions as we go through the packet, but I think from here, I'd rather pass it back to Dr. Bickhardt or Mr. Frederick if you guys want to.
Yeah, so just to kind of open up to discussion, and you know, I kind of challenged everyone last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever we met last, to come with solutions in hand. You know, the reality is, while tax increases are always fortunate and something we don't want to work toward, reality is pencils are more expensive every year. Heat is more expensive every year. Lights are more expensive every year. So how do we get to maybe middle ground to have a budget, have a good quality program, quality education, and take care of our staff at the same time? So I'm just going to open up to the floor, and I'm going to kind of specifically look to those people that challenged the approval of the preliminary budget and say, where do you see areas of opportunity?
Mind if I jump in really quick before we do that? So I thought a lot about this being in this role, being new to this role, and the challenge of a budget. I think I recognize that from the time I walked in, but it's definitely a reality of what we need to do. And I think it's important, and I recognize, I appreciate, 3 people in the audience, and I'm hoping other people are online. And if there's a way we can ensure our community knows how important this is, we're sitting here today for this reason. We're sitting here today specifically to talk about this budget, which impacts our schools and our kids. And we want to be transparent. We want to be clear. While this document, I recognize, has been available, it's available in any district every year. Not often do people look at it, detailed look at it from the community standpoint. And that's understandable. It's a lot of, where are we at, 30 some pages.
It's
Right.
not available from every district. That is something that we go above. I
Thank you.
just added,
Gotcha. Thank you, sir. And I know the amount of work I've seen. I mean, I've been, and I'll come back to that at a later point, because, and I think you all know the amount of time and effort Mr. Fink puts into this to make it organized. I mean, even these charts, even the new things are added because we discussed what I felt some of you were telling me you were looking for. So that's where we are in this conversation. Ultimately, we're willing to look at this. We want some feedback. We want to look at, where things go. One of the most important things I feel I need to say is our greatest asset is our greatest expenditure, and that is our staff and our teachers in their contract. I absolutely believe, and I think this board understands that because you approved that contract last year, that they are paid. I do not think our teachers are even close to being overpaid. I don't think they're underpaid. I think we are very adequately paid. I think we've got a great teaching staff, but there are many things we hit in this budget that we can't touch because it is a collective bargain. So I'm with Mr. Fink. I think ultimately we want our public to know we are willing to open this and have that conversation as a board. But I challenge all of us to, how do we come together and say, okay, this is where we want to be? And the other thing I would ask all of you to consider is the initial vote for this is procedural, right? But we want to dive in right now, and that's great. We are prepared. I did not want to be presumptuous, but we are prepared tonight if we choose to say we are willing to do the preliminary budget as it was because we are making changes as we speak. It would just allow us to keep the process going forward. So it is not on your agenda. We have the verbiage and the wording. If we would choose to add that because you feel comfortable that, you know what, we had a lengthy discussion. We've made some reductions in expenditures, but ultimately to keep the process going and the procedure, we can do that. Mr. Fink comes back next week immediately with those changes, and we're moving towards the next step. It allows the procedure to continue to go, but it keeps intact. I think what most of you want is, let's look at this. Let's go. Let's begin page by page. And I think that's where I would want to start. Is I think Mr. Fink dove in immediately there. I just referenced the timeline, but he dove immediately into those revenues. I mean, we can start there with any additional questions, and then we can look at each department. I think it's important if there's something you don't understand or hasn't been spent, the time's been spent discussing it. Let's do that. Let's make sure we're all clear so our public knows this is where the money is going. Thank you.
Well said, thank you. So, in this out there, do we want to go line by line? Or do we just want to freeform it?
Particular areas that anyone wants to talk about.
I have a question about, I don't know, these aren't numbered.
Are the pages numbered at the bottom?
Yeah, the pages are numbered. If you look down,
Or do you have the new one or the old
I have
one?
the old one, and that's the one I took.
there's one in your packet.
I'm not looking through that one again. Expenditures under superintendent, board services, and legal.
Is the number.
That would be page 11. Page 11 and 12.
What exactly are the expenditures for board services? And then it says board treasurer, and what are the expenditures for that as well?
General liability insurance.
So,
Am I on a different page?
Yeah, maybe you're
Okay,
right.
okay.
so you're saying under 2310 dashboard services?
This one that I'm looking at doesn't have those numbers. This is the one we got last time.
Oh, that's the summary page. Okay, gotcha. Okay, so that the page she was looking at is page
Page
4. Yeah, which is the summary of their, so it was superintendent, board services and legal. So if you go to page 12 and 13, it actually breaks that out into more detail. Sorry, 11 and 12 breaks it out into more detail. But when you look at the superintendent, board services and legal, it would be, we set money aside for PSBA training. So we have the PSBA trainers come in, that costs money. General liability insurance, we have to insure all of you to protect you against lawsuits, litigation. So that's part of that cost. We have to pay to advertise, or it's a requirement that we advertise in local papers for our meetings. So we set aside money in the budget for that. That falls in there as well. And then the largest expenditure, and two largest expenditures in there are two of the larger ones, sorry, are the PSBA annual fee. It's like $12,000 to remain a member of PSBA. And then our graduation costs are now put into the underboard services. So basically the school board is the one that has the budget that's funding our graduation. So that includes caps, gowns, gifts, yard signs, diplomas, everything that would go into a graduation ceremony. Trying to see if there's anything else. Negotiation services, that's not something we have this year. That would be for when we renegotiate the CBA. That typically costs anywhere from $20,000 to $25,000 in legal fees. Thankfully, we don't have that this year. And then also under that would be superintendent's office. So part of that budget also would include the superintendent's salary, the administrative assistant's salary, their benefits, their supplies, travel, things like that. So that's what makes up that budget line item.
So then when we have the PSBA annual fee, is that something that, do we have to be members of the PSBA?
It would be beneficial to not be a part of the PSBA. I mean, there are many services they provide too.
What services do we use besides the?
Last year,
We use them to hire the
hired a
superintendent.
Yeah. I mean, you have
Essentially,
to
we
be-
don't hopefully do
Policy
that every
updates.
year.
all the
Policy updates.
policies.
So do they help us with policy updates?
So we get templates
We
from
get,
them
yeah,
and then we can modify them for our own needs.
Okay. And then I was also wondering the agenda manager that we use, is that something we also, I'm assuming, pay for?
Yes.
Mhm.
That would be, I think that falls under the software budget, so under tech.
Okay.
Is it anyway?
That can be cut.
That could be cut.
Some of us use agenda manager.
I don't think it's just us that use it.
Kick it a few times.
Where's the cost of agenda manager? That we're-
You know, I think that's a good point here. It's like, there's a number that's put out there that isn't clear, like for the general fee. So I think, Mrs. Strauss, that's a great example of, okay, this is where some of those things have to go.
Right.
Appreciate that.
What is a board treasurer?
PA school code requires us to have a board treasurer. So that's Heidi Schultz. She's the one that does accounts payable for us. And she does like in your packet, you receive the checks that are cut each month. And all of the reports that come out as far as like savings balances, investment balances, things like that. That's the treasurer's job. And so we also have to ensure that she has to be bonded. So that's also the cost to bond her.
Thank you.
Yep.
Again, these are projected amounts in those categories. This is putting you on the spot a little bit, Derek. Do we typically meet those thresholds? Pretty close, I think.
Typically, yeah, when we're talking about things like insurances, software programs, licensing, sometimes the budget's put together before we get those, but then that's what I'm updating as we move closer to the final budget. So usually like all of these companies that deal with schools know that we're putting our budget together at this time of the year. So they're good about getting us the new rates, the new costs. And at the very least, they'll give us a heads up and they'll say, hey, expect a 3% increase. And then we just budget that in. Typically, we come in at a pretty good spot.
What is our typical surplus?
Year to year?
Year to year.
Depends. The last few years were very odd with COVID. Typically, so I have it in front of me here. 2021, 22 was like a little over 2.5 million. But again, to me, that's a big outlier because of the influx of federal dollars. Going back though, 2021 was 363,000 surplus. 1920 was $400,000 surplus. 1819 was a $1.8 million deficit due to mold. 1718 was a $374,000 deficit. 1617 was a $1.2 million surplus. 1516 was a $970,000 surplus, and then 1415 was a $1.3 million deficit. I can't speak off the top. I have no idea for the numbers before me, like exact reasons why there would be such a large deficit or surplus. I mean, could certainly pull that information if that's something that you guys need. But it's just not something I have on the top of my head since it was before my time.
You don't know what you feel it would be this year.
Oh, no, I think we're trending in the right way this year. I won't put a number down, but I do believe we'll have a surplus. So I feel confident. I feel confident.
What you think? Well, I think one of the things, and I don't know how much detail, but I know we tend to say the reason there was a surplus this past year was because of COVID relief funding.
Mhm.
You want to elaborate just a little bit
Oh, sure.
on that, just so we're,
Yeah,
I think we just need to make sure
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
clear on
So-
what that means.
So we received just one code, the ESSERS 3 was over $4 million in federal funding alone, I think, through those ESSERS programs, as well over $7 million over the course of a couple of years. The board elected to use those monies in large part to offset some of the salaries we had to maintain staffing through those tough times. But then what coincided with that was an inability to staff other positions. So we were working well below capacity in a lot of our positions, and that created a surplus in funding. It also was a time where we, as in myself, I budgeted very conservatively through those times with revenues because no one had any idea what earned income tax was going to look like, nor did we know what our tax collection rate was going to look like. It was sort of like prepare for the worst kind of thing and hope for the best. And what we found out was the tax collection rate ended up being really boosted by the money that the government gave out, like the surplus check or the additional, I forget what they were called, the checks that everybody got. Stimulus, thank you. The stimulus money, what we found, I think really did stimulate our local economy, at least as far as paying the tax bills, because our collection rate was as good as it's ever been. So what we're doing now though is kind of trending back to our typical projections for revenue. So with those things combined, the conservative revenue projections, the additional grant money, and then the inability to fully staff, that's what created the surplus that we saw for 21-22.
Thank you.
Eric, you know what I'm missing is the column that compares the budget items to last year's budget and the percentage change.
That's not in there?
Am I missing it?
Oh. I get you.
Well, for specific, oh, it is.
I don't know. if it got-
Specifically, I'm interested in the transportation budget because I'm hearing that our transportation costs have gone up,
They have.
specifically in the area of field trips, which bothers me because when we agreed to that changeover, we were told everything would stay the same.
In the area of what, Brett?
Transportation.
Yeah.
But you said something specific.
Field trips.
Field trips. Thank you.
So one thing that is, and this is not really budget related, but to kind of touch on that point
Yes, it is.
is that we are doing a full audit of every invoice we've received from the new contractor because we feel as though that there may be some erroneous charges there. Not necessarily anything that was done on purpose, but new process, new contractor, we're going through and looking at all of those. So there could be a situation where we do see a refund in some of those expenses, which will go back to each budget where the field trip money came from.
And ultimately with transportation, The funding formula is what, about 50% we get reimbursed?
Not less than that.
Less than that.
Yeah, maybe 40, if we're lucky.
Yeah, and I think as a board, we are well aware that transportation from the leadership team is a critical piece moving forward with our families and keeping it maximum under an hour. I think we've talked about that. I would argue, can we go lower than that? You know, and does that increase cost? Possibly, but is it in the best interest of our kids? I believe so. I think that's an important point to bring up today too. It's as we move forward, we got to look at that.
Get better with that.
Agreed.
So we're looking at another van?
I did ask that. I said, are we in a spot where you may be justified in buying an additional 10-passenger van to reduce the amount that we rely on, getting additional van transportation for trips. So it's something we're discussing. No, nothing set in stone yet, though.
I feel bad for our teachers who budgeted for field trips this year and were blindsided by the hike in transportation costs.
Yeah. No, we're
Completely unfair.
Yeah, we are looking into, in fact, Darren Tall, our transportation supervisor, was at Fishing Creek's office this morning to meet with them about that. And so we're auditing that and seeing if there's anything that shouldn't have been charged that was, and making sure that they're on the same page.
Shop around. Want to get a good contract, put two negotiators together,
Yeah.
vendors together. I know I'm not looking at this right, but it does look like a 400 and some % increase. Is that right?
Where are we at here?
So that would be line item 2711 transportation. All right. I see an increase of 457%. Doesn't sound quite right.
Give me one moment.
That's supervision. My apologies. That's supervision of transportation.
Oh, yeah.
So what accounts to that 475? 57%?
That would be because we went from the stipend, so we were doing the stipend for one of our school secretaries who was covering for transportation. That stipend was just a little bit over 10,000. And now what I did was I split Darren's salary between the business office and transportation, because he does 50% tax collection and accounts receivable and 50% transportation. So that's why you see such a large increase there.
Okay. Thank you.
I think that's been important because that's been an internal discussion with Darren being in that role of how do we get better? Like from our standpoint, when we're analyzing it, what do we need to do when it comes to routes and all of that? So it's important.
We really gained 457% better service over our secretary doing it, because she did a phenomenal job last year.
I can't speak to what she did prior, but I think what you've gained is the diversity that Darren brings in his role,
It's also not
the accounting side of it all.
It's also not a 457% increase. It's just a move from one area of the budget to another.
Yeah.
So
Move the
while
dollars.
that budget line increased, the business office side decreased because Jane's full salary when she was here doing accounts receivable was in just business office, but now it's split between the two.
Okay.
Yeah, there's not an actual overall
Yeah.
change in cost.
Distribution. Responsibility.
I have just a general question. Under the supervision of fiscal services, in the old packet, I don't know what it is in the newer one. 113. Looking at the numbers from last year. Went up, it looks like about $10,000.
Yeah, that number is because I wanted to make sure that there's an uncertainty about the new business and HR office as far as what was going to be housed there. So when I created the budget, that number is to fully furnish that space as needed. So it's a case where I don't expect that we'll need to use that amount of money. But that would cover, chairs, desks, things like that, like anything to make that building operational.
Yeah, because I thought maybe it was like due to inflation.
No.
Then I thought that, I was like, well, why didn't postage go up?
Yeah, no, and that typically that supply line is a pretty small one. We don't use too many. That's usually like central office supplies. And there's just not a whole lot of supplies being used there. It's not like classroom supplies, things like that.
The other area that I had a question about was when we bring in substitute teachers, we pay them, X amount. I don't know.
$150 a day.
Yeah, I didn't know that was showing up in the public. So it wasn't-
That's under where that falls would be under regular education. Should be 1110 regular programs. It's page 7 of the new one, and it's under 122 substitutes. And that includes the 2 full-time super subs and then a projection for all of our regular subs for all buildings for the year.
Well, what was going to lead up to that was why don't we pay our coaches that exact amount as well, since they're technically a sub as well?
I think that's a question for someone other than myself.
Are you talking about instructional coaches?
Yes.
I think, well, they're in the CBA, so they're part of the teaching staff. They're not that piece of it all. You couldn't just shift that. They're a salary position.
Contractual.
They're contractual salary
Mhm.
position.
Where did you hear they're just subs?
The instructional teachers,
Mhm.
I heard that when I first got on.
Yeah.
A while ago.
Yeah, and so I think,
They're doing more than just subbing.
correct.
I know they are currently. I know a lot of them. are.
Yeah, the unfortunate part of all this is we don't want is our instructional coaches, reading specialists, times get brought in if we cannot. I do believe middle and high school, we've had a more successful year when it comes to subs this year. I know we still have our moments at the elementary and we're looking, again, we're creating categories of things as a team we're working on, subbing being one of them. How do we maximize getting subs here so we're not doing that and those people are focused on, student facing.
Not discounting what Josh has to say. I think they're a good place to look. Those coaches started when we did the digital conversion. Now that we're in this new world of digital learning, are they all still needed? That is a question I was going to bring up. Have we looked at those specifically?
So thank you. Yes,
So I haven't seen them.
thank you. So here's what I guess a couple things that I did not say when I did my opening of this is as we look at the projection, what we don't want to forget is we do a cost projection out over the 7 years and what we've looked at. That projection takes into what Mr. Fink brought into that was from the leadership team, being that staffing is our number one expense. That's a reduction of minimally 10, if not 12 positions. So I think we need to think about that as we look at the big picture, we're accounting for that as we move on and being clear. And we've met with teachers and I've said this to them. What are we going to look at? Number one, we're going to look at is when anybody leaves and retires, okay, or leaves for another job, we're going to have to look at that position as an individual position and say, is it necessary to replace based on what it does? Okay. If I were to tell you, and I brought this up at the February meeting, do I think we need to be looking at a realignment at the elementary? Yes. Are we going to talk about scheduling at the high school? Yes. Why are they important? I believe it allows us a reduction of 2 to 3 elementary teachers over time, maybe 4 or 5 secondary. I think as coaches are there, I think we've got great people, great coaches. As time goes on, do we look at how their roles change? I also believe we need to continue to look with reading specialists. We've had conversations about the need for math intervention as well. So I think roles evolve as we go forward too. But it is an important piece for the public to know that this discussion, while important for this budget, we are projecting out that long range projection is already accounting for a reduction of probably 10 staff members minimally. So those kind of things are going to be looked at. They're going to happen as we go forward. Do they get us necessarily in the moment where we want to go? Maybe not.
That was one of the things that Mr. Frederick asked us to think about things. Is it time we consider some sort of retirement incentive to try to keep this ball rolling down the hill faster? Try to.
We don't have a great record of that. The last time we did it, kind of bit us. I mean, I'm not saying you can try it again.
Well,
There is a
Like
teacher
it-
shortage though.
That's the other part I'm
Yeah.
concerned about is,
I don't think we lost out, but we didn't see the benefit we wanted to see.
But I don't
Yeah,
think,
maybe that's a better way of
We
putting it.
need, yeah, we need.
some of what I'm hearing is we don't need to worry about filling that position. If we could just, I don't want to furlough the staff, if we could incentivize someone to say, hey, maybe I should just step away. You're
sure. My only answer to that is looking at the directory that the team has and looking at what has been done over the year, we lose probably 10 to 12 people a year. So I think over the next 2 years, and when I say lose, I should be cautious with that statement. People leave or go things for different reasons, right? So unless we have a uniquely different year this year where we don't have that, and I even say even the next 2 years, I think we need to be very cautious about staff reductions. If we don't, I don't want to go down a path of furloughing. That's not even, I don't think in anybody's minds. But we need to make some changes in our structure, in our instructional structure to guide us there. And I think that's what we're talking about as a leadership team to get us there. If we get to a point where people aren't leaving, I just don't see that being an issue. I think people are going to. I think there's going to be retirements. I think you've got staff that Mrs. Strasser has said there's a teacher shortage. So people have the ability to go anywhere right now that you would never have expected. So that's why each position, when they leave, we have to say, hey, and I'll give you the first example. I was the big advocate for the first grade teacher last year, adding that because I want to keep class numbers down. If I saw numbers were high, I would say the same thing to all of you. But at the same time, if somebody leaves at an elementary level this year, we should have a serious conversation of, is it necessary if we're making changes next year, can we handle it for a year so we get the immediate savings? So we're going to analyze that. We're going to dive into every single position as it goes, especially that professional side of it all, because we know we want to make that reduction based on our instructional planning, not just to reduce staff from a teaching standpoint, but from what we're looking to do instructionally. But
I just sit here and I watch a declining enrollment.
Yep.
And our staff doesn't seem to be declining at the same rate the enrollment does.
I know it's not the same dollars you're probably talking about, but do we still provide the incentive if they give us their retirement?
It's
notice?
$750 if they give us notice prior to January, some 31st or I can't remember.
Something.
Sometime in January.
December was one amount,
Yeah.
and January was another. It's not the dollars you're talking about, but it does allow you to know who's going to be retiring and to go make the decision.
With the incentive, you just always have that risk. You want to get rid of 10 and 20 take you up on it. What do you do?
Yeah.
Hire 10 cheaper ones.
During a teacher shortage, that's not always the easiest thing.
That's my worry about that. There was a day where we had people waiting to take those positions. I'm
Yeah.
a little nervous right now.
Yeah.
I do.
Not saying it's a bad idea, but
Yeah.
there's a risk.
It is.
Yeah, and I think what's important, and I apologize, I should have been prepared for that, is making sure we have, I want to go back and look at the past 10 years where the professional staffing was and where it is to this day, so the public is aware of that. I'll make sure I have that next week. It's my fault. I should have had that prepared tonight. I apologize. I think one thing I'll bring attention to on page 8 is cyber alt ed. I think that's an area where we can, if we can do some of the things we're talking about, I think we can see immediate reductions there. I think that's why it's important, the work that Mr. Berge and Dr. Z have done. We can reduce that even by $50,000. That's it helps us get to a goal.
So I'm glad you put this chart in here, the color chart, because the number I have in my head is $20,000 per student.
Mm.
At 1,941 students times $20,000 is 38 million. And that's where I feel our budget should be. If we're spending more than $20,000 per student, we might as well just go to college at that point. I mean, when you just really think about it, we either need to decrease expenses or find a way to drive revenues outside of taxes. And I saw there's a line on here where we get $100,000 for I've assumed some special ed students for teaching them. I mean, if we're gonna get 100,000 for 4, let's buy 10.
Oh, you're talking about the ones that come in, the revenue for,
Yes, the
yes,
revenue for
that's
from
for
other
special,
districts.
for the special education students. that
And
come
maybe
to
it's not, that's not the avenue, but we have a CT program here. Can
That's the
we,
avenue.
can we offer it to other districts? To fill our classes, to drive some revenue. Let's market the products we have rather than rolling back on the shoulders of our taxpayers.
So I'll just add one thing about the comment, like, I don't think you can compare apples to apples, the cost of educating public education students compared to attending a university, just because we have mountains of mandates that were federally required and state required to fulfill and not funded. The universities don't have those same mandates, and you can't look at the tuition cost for one of our students compared to a tuition cost for a school, because that's not the only revenue source schools have as well. So like, I had that in mind because you said that before. And like, for instance, like the least expensive university I can find locally is Bloomsburg, and they're nearing $25,000 per student. And they don't have any kind of, like just absolute mountain of mandates that we would have. I mean, it goes all the way up to like, the private school, Susquehanna, Bucknell, you're talking about almost $65,000 per student that school pays out of their operating expenses. Like it's just not apples to apples. And that's why I provided the slide that I did for you guys to show, like, yes, it's crazy, but it's crazy that that's what we have to pay. Like, it's not just us, it's every single district in PA. Like, so I'm with you.
Right.
Like,
Well, my other question then pertaining to this slide is, when we sit here, we hear it costs, 20 whatever thousand to send a kid to cyber school, whereas it only costs $7,500 to educate them in-house. But right here, there's proof that it costs us $20,000 per student on average.
Right. Well, that's
Cyber school isn't that far out of line.
Well, that's where the cyber school tuition rates come from. They're based on the cost for us to educate a student. That's where they get their numbers from. So,
But they're not incurring the cost of
but
everything else.
they don't have the
Yeah.
cost that we have. So it doesn't quite make sense to me, but that's where that number comes from. So when it's $14,000 for us to pay for a kid to go to cyber for a year, that's because it's the state's formula saying, oh, well, it costs you $14,000 to educate that kid in your own building. So that's what you need to pay the cyber school. The thing is, when that kid goes from Milton to the cyber school, we don't get to shut off the heat for their seat. We don't get to shut off the lights for their
I
seat. We don't
understand
get to
that.
take off a 20th of the teacher's salary when they leave. Like it doesn't add up. So that's where it becomes difficult.
We need reform.
So I think back to the positive part of what you said was the CTE programs. Can we offer them outside of Milton?
I would love that.
You can, not to speak on any districts that anybody's familiar with in the room, but there are some local districts that, straight up have billboards on several widely traveled routes in this area saying, which is, I want to say caution, but when we talk about how cyber schools advertise themselves saying, come to our cyber school, it's free. It's not free. But that is how it's advertised by several local districts saying, here are our CTE programs. You can enroll with our district for free and attend our district for free, which on the surface level is accurate. Yes.
To the parent.
To the
Correct.
yeah.
I think another part of the CT that we want to make sure we clearly state publicly is, because we're a comprehensive high school and that we keep our kids here and we don't have kids leaving and going to a different VOTEC, that number of savings is significant. 190 some kids we talked about.
Yeah, we have 196 currently enrolled. Next year, we're projecting 3 students are going to out of district placements, 2 to Sun Tech and 1 to, I believe, Northumberland County Technical School. And that's going to be approximately $60,000 to send those 3 students there. So about 20 grand per kid times 197.
It's only 3 kids compared to.
But the answer is yes. And we have had it happen a couple times here, not because we advertised, but because some districts had reached out with some interest. But it's absolutely doable.
Should we put it out there to all the neighboring districts that were willing to bring their children in and educate them in our CTE program? Let it be known.
So
I think if it's doable, we should.
It's a double-edged sword.
Ready.
it is, I'll let Mr. Heiss.
I think the more we advertise that, the more people are going to realize they can do the same thing and send their kids to Suntech for programs we don't have. I think it's a two-edged sword.
we could see some, I think we'll lose more. Because we don't offer all the programs that a Sun Tech offers or.
No, but if we
Montour.
could revenue neutral it rather than losing 60,000.
Making the difference in 30 days.
Yeah, but I would say a program like entrepreneurship opens us. That's not housed by every district in this area.
That's correct. So the way it works is, so we are, I believe Warrior Run is too, I think. I'm not positive on that. But we are one of the very few in this area. I believe it's us in Warrior Run. We are not a sending district. We don't have an agreement with any CTC. But we're giving them a very large sum of money on an annual basis and working with the JOC to help fund their entire, all of their programs and their building and grounds and salaries and so on and so forth. So with that, if our students request to go somewhere, they have the ability, but we also have to find them a spot if a spot is available. If a district is a sending school, so I'm just going to use Danville as an example. Danville is a sending district to Columbia, Montour, Votech. Any kid that is in Danville and wants to go into a CTE program that's at Columbia, Montour, Votech, that's where they go. If Columbia, Montour, Votech does not offer the program that they want, and they want to go somewhere else where that program is offered, Danville is required to send them and pay that. So what I'm getting at is, say you're marketing this, I'm just going to spitball Lewisburg. Okay, Lewisburg is a sending district to Sun Area Votech. If we have a program that Sun Area Votech also has, Lewisburg must send their kids to Sun Area Votech. If we offer a program that they don't offer and their student wants to come here, they are able to come here with Lewisburg paying the tuition. I will concur with Mr. Hostman as well. There is also that because we're not a sending school,
Right.
we are open to students, to any program that they could request. And we have stipulations in place, obviously. But yeah, both things are absolutely realistic.
And then another revenue source, you have to have a Milton address to be part of the Milton Cyber School.
Yes,
You do. You can't open that up
not to my knowledge. I don't think we can do that. No.
because I think you and Dr. Z have created a tremendous program that if we could get that out there and become a cyber school.
Yeah.
Is it because of the competition that they don't allow that?
I'd have to look. I don't know the details of it. I don't want to spitball because I don't throw out anything out there.
That's another advertisement on TV for free.
Yeah.
It's free.
Yeah,
Cyber
I know.
school, it's, you can go to for free.
Yep.
Will that come alive as things progress? It's possible. Like, will districts, I don't know. I would think legally right now, still, because it's an in-house program, has to be you're enrolled in the district. You live in the
My
district.
guess is, Andrew just mentioned it, so we probably have to look at creating a cyber charter program. And I don't even know what that would look like.
I was just thinking that myself. Do you spin that off into like a 503C cyber charter school program and then roll the money back into the capital campaign?
There's
I'm just like,
there's logistics and requirements to basically starting a charter school in the state of Pennsylvania. And like Mr. Berg said, I'm not sure what they are, but I think that's what you'd have to do to get yourself established as a charter school.
One of the topics that was brought up that I want to go back to is special education, because I think that's an important topic. And I know Mrs. Gurton and Mrs. Harris have spent a lot of time kind of preparing next week to go over some of the key things. And I just want to point out, I think special education is also a difficult conversation because it's an unfunded mandate and you're looking at a budget of $6.6 million. And we talk about areas where we might underspend. I don't think there's a chance you underspend special ed. I also think it's important for us to be realistic that 6.6 could be $7 million easily, because our goal is to educate our kids. But I also recognize that there are certain situations where kids need different programs and they are highly expensive, and then we are left to pay for them. I've been very proud this year and working, with Catherine and Misty on what can we do in-house, everything we can do. There's also a reality We have to make some decisions that are difficult where kids can't be here, and we need to look at other programs for the best interest of the child first and our staff. But that's a difficult conversation when it costs $200,000 you're not planning for. But it's the best decision for the kid, first of all, and then for the rest of the staff because of multitude of reasons. So that's a tough one right there. When we look at special ed, just, I think it's important for the public and everyone to be well aware that you try to keep to a budget, but that's an area where overspending can happen pretty quickly simply because of the nature of appropriately educating the students. Mr. Fink, just looking at page 23, debt services. I think it's also, since we're sitting here, I know we've talked about it, but that is in line with the past multiple years, correct?
Correct.
Just want to elaborate just a few minutes on that.
Yeah, I'm just looking to see if I have. I do. Okay. Yeah, so the projection, and this includes our new borrowing, it's not updated to the dollar yet because I wanted for us to do this review first before I go in and fully update everything, but it's very close. It puts for 23-24, it puts the debt repayment percentage of our budget at 5.5%. So historically, going back to the 2014-15 school year, our yearly average is 6% of the budget being paid towards debt repayment. So we're actually 0.5% lower than what our typical amount is. And that makes sense because we paid off some debt, we refinanced it, we extended it out. But what we should see now is that these are all fixed rate borrowings. So we know what we're going to pay. There's no intention to borrow any more money. So when I come back next year for the budget after this one, and then after that, and after that, that annual percentage of the repayment of the budget should decrease because even with our absolute best efforts, our budget will increase year over year because 75% of our budget is made up of staffing, and that's going to see an increase. So you'll see that percentage of budget being towards debt decrease as the dollar amounts kind of maintain and level out over the next 3 years or so. But yeah, historically it's in line with what we pay. It's also our total debt is also at a good place. It's part of the reason we got our A+ rating from S&P. Like our total dollar amount of money owed compared to our annual revenues is at a safe spot for our district. So all in all, I'd say we're in a good place with our money that we owe back.
Well, that's the first thing Joe Public says when he sees a potential tax increase. So you built that fancy football field. Well, in all reality, that didn't change anything.
It's not because we extended out. Like, does it cost us money over the next 40 years? Yeah, of course it costs us money, but it doesn't impact our annual cash flow the way you would expect. Now, to say that, we did take an additional 10 million that wasn't planned three or 4 years ago when this all started. And that does result in about $300,000 more annually being paid towards it. So while, yes, we're still historically better than we usually are, we could have been in an even better situation.
Right.
But there was a lot of factors in play there. Like we know that the cost of supplies went way up. We didn't have a lot of people bidding on our projects. So we kind of had to go with the best available. And we didn't want to reduce any scope in our project for Bacher. So
we were able to save on interest and
for sure. And the one benefit we're seeing too now is, like I said earlier, in the revenues, we're seeing a huge increase on our investment returns. While it's not going to offset the annual amount, it's covering about a third of that increase, at least for this year and for next year. So no, it's a spot overall I'm happy with.
What is our increase in athletics from last year to
I'm sorry?
What is the increase?
Oh,
in
for athletics? Yeah, give me 1 second. I can let you know. And I apologize. I'll come back next week with the breakdown, like you mentioned, Brett. That's my fault. I think I just put it into the wrong budget book when I asked Brenda to print it. So that is entirely on me. The overall change for the athletics budget is an increase of 3%, which is what we typically try to look for.
Okay.
Page is that on?
29.
So the total should be 862,294, and that's a $25,300 increase from the prior year. So it's 3%.
I want to comment on that. I think an important conversation I've had with a few of you, that I think the public should hear as well, is as we're talking about athletics, and now, I mean, we're looking here at reductions, but I also think we've had an internal conversation about the importance of making sure certain areas of the arts are given additional funding. We've looked at music, we've looked at various areas of that. I think that's as important, even though when you're looking at reductions, we've had a very good conversation about what can we do to make sure we feel like our band program especially is starting to move in the right direction. So how do we keep that momentum going?
So when we're looking at athletics, there's each sport has their own breakdown. There's a lot asking for uniforms. There's a lot of money spent on travel. Out of curiosity, what does the Booster Club money go to and the ticket sales each sport go to?
So I'll let Rod answer the Booster Club part, but the ticket sales go into the general fund. That's one of our lists. Like when you look at the revenues page and it shows admissions into events like event admissions, that's where that money goes. So it just goes in and becomes a revenue for the district. So it doesn't like go in and offset what they're spending. It just becomes part of our revenue stream.
Through concessions, which now the Booster Club basically do the concessions part of where all the money is being raised. That money is going into any kind of updates we're doing with the banners, end of season awards, scholarship money that we give out at the end of every school year with graduation, and little miscellaneous items like that. Also now, this is the first year for it. Something new that we have not done before, but the Booster Club is coming and presenting a check for any excess money that they have in their funds to the school, which is then going into an account that we're going to use for miscellaneous items as sports need those monies.
So a team could come to you and say, we would like the dollars that the Booster Club has earned to help offset our new uniforms.
Not for uniforms. Uniforms are on a 5-year cycle that are set up through my budget. And that's why if you go down through each sports line items, you may see some ask for uniforms, others not. Each team is on a 5-year cycle for uniforms. So I believe next year football is up for, I think it's home uniforms. And that's a big ticket item to buy 70 football uniforms. It's a lot of money to be able to do that. So 5-year cycle is how the uniforms work.
And is that at every level, the middle school and the high school?
Yep.
Makes wrestling travel so much more expensive than the other sports.
Sectionals, districts, regionals, states. They've got a lot of travel outside of regular season.
Tournaments.
In tournaments, yep.
Early in the season.
Yep. Yep.
Right, so ask the same about entrance fees for the musical.
Same thing.
They're going to the general fund.
And where does the fee that the athletics have to pay just to be a part of it? Is that in the general fund?
So you're saying the money like the stage earns, is that what you're asking?
He's saying
Tickets.
for tickets.
Tickets. Oh,
I think that's a
okay.
change that started just before I got here when the school started funding the musical, but previously it was paid for by the Booster Club. It was paid for by Stage to fund that program.
Yeah.
When I started, Mr. Wall, who was the interim business administrator, put in the budget money to ensure that because I think at that time Stage said that they didn't have funds available to do the show. So then he put in the budget money, which is under extracurriculars, under student activities, should be in this budget right before.
3211.
Yep, and so that money's there to fund the fall play and school musical. And so when that change took place, then ticket receipts came back to the general fund to offset some of our costs.
Definitely not for this exercise, but it might be interesting sometime just to see the amount of income brought in by each extracurricular versus how much the district gives to the extracurricular, just to see who's pulling their weight.
I can tell you some of them are not pulling a whole lot, but that's the nature of like different sports, things like that aren't going to have large attendance.
Like tennis is pretty reasonable.
Now that we're playing in the stadium, we're collecting gate for all admissions, correct?
Which is why I boosted it way up. We're seeing
Sports that
we've seen a
didn't
big
used to get
increase.
soccer and field hockey never, now we have revenue.
Yes.
And I think that's another positive, right? We're seeing increased revenue there, and we're still allowing our students in free, our veterans in free, our senior citizens in free. I think that's a positive aspect of this.
Another question that I had about the budget, I know, Dr. Bickert, you and I have discussed it, but just to put it out there. And I can't tell you where exactly it is because it's broken down in different areas of the budget, but when our staff goes for trainings, are we limiting how many go for the same training? Having multiple people going, or is one person going on behalf of the school and bringing it back?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something now that we're out of COVID. And as Mrs. Strasser said, we talked about this. I think now that we're out of COVID, you know, we've got the opportunity to go to some places, but we've also got the advantage of some online things, Zoom, that allow for that. But, you know, I'll give an example that we did this year. There was a training that I think Dr. Patrick, there was a handful of people that were going to go to, and then it ended up that you and one of the coaches went. And I think that's an important piece of, I've said that to the leadership team, is as leaders, you know, some of these things we need to go to, and then as leaders come back and do that training with teachers. And that was a great example of that, where it was, you know, at times it's difficult for an administrator to leave because there's so many other things going on, but when it's that kind of stuff that brings back new things to our teachers and our staff, it's good for our leaders to do that. So I think that's an important, like when we look at, as we move forward here, I think that's the question, right? We started with, you know, are we going to have $20,000 or less each year when it comes to the project? And we reduce a little bit inside of a travel budget? Yes. You know, can we begin to look at all those kind of things? And I think that's, as we go through here, what I want to say to the board is our team is committed coming back and making some of these, you know, maybe the reductions you don't see right now, but we looked at it initially from step one. And I think Mr. Fink has said that of here's where we see things, but as things come in line, we know some things have to be pulled back, some conversations, and that's our next step. You know, I think when we're ready, an important conversation for the board is that direction of where can we go? What is the goal of the board when it comes to taxes and where they want to see that go? And how can we get you there that you feel comfortable, that you're well aware of what's in here and you feel confident, but we're making reductions where you feel is necessary to guide everyone forward, and the community understands that. That can be one of those areas. I mean, it may not be a lot, but if it's a couple $1,000, it matters.
Nursing is, or excuse me, guidance is one of those areas that you may have seen. Guidance counselors have not gone to the state guidance conference, and some of them have never been there. So you would see all of them going in this budget. But then it would be cyclical. They wouldn't go for another few years. Another model could be we send one elementary, one high school this year, send somebody else the year after. We've kind of followed those kind of cyclical models in the past. Special education, similar. In years past, we would, maybe the MDS teacher would go to the low incidence conference. 1 year transition coordinator goes to the transition conference. 1 year, they're not going the next year or even the year after.
Right.
So we can be very flexible that way, but if you were looking, guidance might have been one area where they were all going, just because they haven't been to that one in a long time, and a lot's changing in that area.
Thank you.
Yep.
So one of the reasons we have a budget surplus as of right now is budgeted employees that are not currently employed. Have we taken a look? Can we just gone about a year without them? Do we really need those positions
Needs
in the
school site.
budget?
So school psych is a non, like, we're probably losing more than we're gaining really on that when it comes to the legal standpoint. So, and we've committed, we're having 2 of our people do that. The other ones are, a lot of those roles fall within our food service and our custodial. And I would say we need them. I mean, I think you talk to some of our custodians and we've spent some time with them, and the food service, they're doing extra hours. They're doing that. And that's great. And that's wonderful, but they're picking up as much as they can. That's why we went to that outside contract.
There's also, I mean, you have our food service director running the counter at Bacher almost daily, or at White Deer, or jumping in the line here, her secretary jumping in the line to run things. So, I mean, are we getting by? Yes, but it's not ideal. I mean, we're paying an administrator's rate to serve food, because if we didn't, the kids wouldn't get their food. So, you know, the goal would be to get those positions filled and get people back to working normal hours. Same with the custodians. I mean, I have a big concern of the custodians. I mean, we're getting by right now. But my fear is they're an aging population. And if we don't get somebody in soon, they're probably going to say, I'm done working overtime. I'm done working these, I'm done. So yeah, I think we just have really great people who are pulling it together to make it work. I'm concerned for our ability to bring it in now. With that said, I mean, Dr. Bickhart mentioned I think it was last meeting, you mentioned the restructure of the position from the tech help desk to assigning additional responsibilities. So we're trying to get creative where, okay, maybe we can find additional responsibilities. We have a need here, but it's not being filled somewhere else, but maybe this brings in a new type of person that would fill it. So just trying to get creative with some of the positions as well. So, I mean, that's my 2 cents. I can't speak for Jeff, Mr. Hoffman, as far as the custodians or Ashley Reese on the food service, but that's what I'm seeing.
We explored outside services.
Yeah, we actually just brought on two custodial outside service members, and they should be finishing up their first week at the end of this week. I think actually it's been a week. And so we have 2 of them working second shift to help fill in that gap. And that was actually approved last board meeting.
Great.
Yeah.
What's the cost projection on using the outside versus hiring them directly?
It is the same. I couldn't believe it.
So, well, I asked because if there's
Benefits.
a potential concern over losing janitors or custodians moving forward, is that something we should consider getting ahead of so we don't have a shortage?
So this is my 2 cents, and you guys can take it or leave it. I want to employ people full-time at the school district. We are one of the largest employers in the county. I want our people in-house with our benefits. Like, I want our staff. So I would prefer we be able to hire somebody full-time who comes and works for us for 10, 15 years. That might be a pipe dream, but that's what I want.
I agree,
but in the meantime, though, we picked up 2 custodians, and each one is costing us the same as if we had 2 full-time employees. So the budgeted amount we have for these open custodial spots, it's being filled with a like for like. We're not
They making
overspending. or
more per
underspending.
hour than our staff.
That's why I wonder.
I don't
Because
know
of the
why.
benefits,
I do
everything,
not know
I don't
why
think
we are
it'd be
not
more.
able to hire people. I am absolutely flummoxed. Like, it's not just us. It's
I'll comment on one of the things we're changing in the hiring process. Again, another topic, hiring process that we're looking at is we also have to recognize that custodians, food service workers, and a lot of our paraprofessionals, they get stopped by the online system because it's very cumbersome. So we're going to go back to a traditional system, and I'm hoping I've heard people say it's a barrier.
That is a difference between us hiring someone and a cleaning service hiring someone. the cleaning service can bring somebody on without having all of the FBI background checks, things like that. Now, we required them before they came to work for us. So we have all of that for these 2 outside contracted custodians. But that's not something that everyone would always need to the degree that a school district requires it for them to clean a property. So while they're doing background checks, we're doing full background checks. So that is a barrier to entry. They have to pay for those clearances, and we've worked around that through the caring fund and other ways to help bring people on. But it's a struggle.
I was just curious if that's something we'd consider if we have a potential vacancy moving forward that we're concerned about. Have we looked at that as a solution so we don't have current employees or janitors or custodians that are being overworked because we didn't.
Yeah, that's why we reached out to these outside services, and we're thankful to develop a relationship now with one, and hopefully it works out. And they're well aware that if we fill these positions, that we will dial back the services with them. So it's a pretty solid agreement. I think it's a win-win for us. So.
And Mr. Harris, to your point, before they started, I went to each custodian, met with them as a group and said, look, this is exactly that. It's about how do we help you right now? Like, if we can't hire, what can we do for you?
There's no contracting food service. That's an all or nothing.
Correct.
And
that's what thank you.
The ghost of Ashley would haunt me for the rest of my life if I even considered bringing in, and Sharon Adamai would be knocking on my door.
Circles us right back to the work Ashley and their team have done to save families money.
Thankfully, I think we're going to be.
It supersedes any of that.
Yeah.
But I come back to I'm not sure it's in paras, in custodians, in food service, that the money savings is. I think they are critical people. They are people that we need more than anything. I think it's our responsibility as a leadership team as we look at this is what's our enrollment, what's our class size, what's our teaching staff, what's our schedule look like that allows us to maximize the teaching staff we have. And if it's not necessary because our enrollment doesn't show it, that's where those reductions come. And again, I've been very clear in meetings with teachers that instructional staff, student population is what drives those decisions. It's not just about willy-nilly, we're going to go cut. And I think I've said this. One of the things I think that was brought up in a realignment was, do we reduce 1 per grade level? That is not going to happen based on calculations of student population. Can we reduce 2 or 3? Absolutely. I really believe that in a realignment scenario. It's a way that guides us. So I think there are ways to look when we reduce staffing that way to getting us a reduction in expenditures.
And that brings me back to the point, is there any way to accelerate that, you get that to move along faster to start to aid in the budget this year and the following years, because the longer we keep a little bit excess staff, it builds and builds and builds and builds. You look at the piecers, you look at the benefit package, you look at the salary. I mean, their planned wages, their planned raises. I mean,
that's a fair question.
I mean, I don't know how we can incentivize somebody to say, hey, I'll retire, but there's some pretty hefty salaries out there that if we could come off the books, that would help.
No, my biggest fear, and I would not have said this 3 years ago, is what Mr. Hoster said is.
And I understand that too, but
that loss of instruction. I will say this, we'll commit to this board, and I think it would happen no matter what it is. If a position leaves and it's unexpected, we really need to make sure. We'd have to have a good reason why we're replacing it, if we knew we were going to be looking at that reduction. And I think that's a critical piece is it something we're looking to reduce in the future based on our programs? Does it change a program? But expediting, and I think that's something to think about. How do we expedite when opportunities present themselves?
Right.
So
At least it'd be something that we would be actioning and hopefully having a plan for rather than just getting blindsided, which would be nice.
right.
Anything that we can have kind of control over when we approach it rather than just finding out unexpectedly gives us at least, extra play. So we don't, maybe we can think ahead of time when it comes to trying to find a replacement teacher or whatever the position may be.
Question is, are you going to get $2 million worth out of the budget doing that?
To,
Depends how long they want to stay for.
You're going to have to pay. I mean,
I
so
know,
it's a one-time fee.
when I hear like what the coaches were here for, they're here for technology and to help the digital. And I hate to say, it, you bring in younger teachers, well, talk about Canvas. They use that system at college. That's what I was explained. It was the most popular collegiate thing. So they're already accustomed to it. There's a lot of benefits to this. We don't need our coaches to coach technology because we're going to bring in people that have used the technology and may even know it better than those that were taught to train our staff. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to.
I mean, I think it's important to state there are 5 coaches coming into this year. We've already reduced, we're making a reduction of 1 going into next year is our intention.
What did we used to have? 8?
But didn't it first
You're
start
right,
with
right.
grant money?
Yeah, I don't know that.
What's
I
that?
don't know.
One position was grant-driven technology.
Only one,
The Sphere, yeah.
way back,
Way back.
way back.
Way back.
Think about the budgetary impact of those additional 6, though. I mean, what they've done and inflated this thing over the last 10 years. And there's 6 people that weren't instructing students that we've carried through the budget and have paid salaries and retirement and benefits to.
I view that a little bit differently. They were supposed to be helping teachers to be better instructors for students. So in essence, they were still instructors.
If they did, and we don't know if there
That
was a
comes down to
positive or a
supervision.
neutral or negative
That's
outcome
another
for that.
conversation.
Yeah, I mean, coming in, seeing it, I think there's a lot of great benefits to having people in those roles. I do. Is it a conversation this team has to look at of what's the best use of all staff in any area? Absolutely. And I think that's why I'm stating we already reduced 1 because I think we looked at that and said, okay, forward facing, how much time are they with kids? There's 1 spot to reduce, I think there's benefit in, what they give us, but like any role, like I said, like an elementary teacher leaving, that opportunity presents itself, we really have to evaluate it.
You see the 4th SRO is in the budget.
It is.
And we increased to 3 this year.
You've been trying for 4.
We approved for.
I know we approved 4.
Yeah.
Do we need 4?
We said we did.
I know we said we did, but
Yeah.
Everybody wanted.
just,
four.
it's one of those positions that's in the budget, but not currently paying the salary.
As of right now, the setup is Officer Durr is primarily at Balker, and then Officer Davis and Evans are primarily at the secondary, and they're very busy.
Okay.
So it is White Deer that on a and how to say it right, on a non, fixed schedule, on an interval schedule, we have people going over or as needed going over. So at any given time you go to White Deer, you may have an officer there, but there will be times that there is not an officer there.
I'm just turning over all the stones.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah,
I think
I went there. I mean, that's just
Yeah,
ask the questions.
We're struggling. The facts are we're struggling to find a 4th.
Can I bring up a point of order? We can turn all those stones over after we pass a preliminary budget. We don't have to do that before we pass a preliminary budget. We're here tonight to pass a preliminary budget.
We are, and it's procedural.
And we have 3 months to turn those stones over.
And how often do we do this? Where we actually sit and discuss it and turn the stones over? We don't just.
Do it
rush
every
through
year.
I was here last year and we did not do this.
We have board presentations on budget every year.
Right, but we didn't go through and break down and allow questions and stuff like we are tonight.
Okay.
So back to procedural portion. My no vote was because it was procedural. And the state of Pennsylvania requires you to pass this preliminary budget to keep the budgetary process moving along. Well, my thought was, if I say no, maybe somebody will see that, oh, Milton didn't pass that. I wonder why they bucked the procedure. It's because in my feelings that we are given all these mandates and all these things we have to follow, and I don't feel they're funded enough. And I just want to, you have a little special meeting to voice my displeasure with Department of Education and their lack of funding for all their mandates. And that's what led me to my vote. So not that I don't believe we shouldn't procedurally pass the budget. We have to continue the process along, but somebody needed to put some brakes on some things to maybe open some eyes. I don't know if it'll work. I don't see any Department of Ed people here. I don't even know if they're paying attention.
But I also, we know that there's some push, right, at the state. There's been some legislation that has moved forward with some refunding. I think that is something as we have to do the procedures and still move forward that, well, so I'll say, here we go. So I think I told Mr. Moser this, and I told some of the leadership team. When I went to one of the only initial superintendent academy meeting I got to, because I learned very quickly in the first few weeks, it's very busy here. I met a gentleman there who did one of the speeches, and I was like, what a neat guy. Well, little did I know he would be the new Secretary of Education. So immediately I emailed him and said, hey, come to Milton, come visit us. Didn't hear anything initially, but then he actually emailed from his actual Secretary of Ed account. And I said, new Superintendent Milton would welcome you. Hopefully you can come visit us. Responded to me personally and said, yep, I'm going to add you to our calendar. My assistant is on this. So, look forward to at some point coming. I don't know when that will be, but I also think, you mentioned that to me. I think that's an important time. If that happens, we will make sure this board or representatives of this board have time to share those concerns. And that if we get that audience and they're willing to come to us and celebrate our district, that's a great opportunity for us to have those moments of conversation. So I think it's important. So hopefully you will, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Yeah, that just to touch on the state funding lawsuit. So I can't recall off the top of my head the district that brought it forth, but it's been years and years and years that this case has been going through the court system. And the judge ruled that Pennsylvania is not adequately and fairly educating all of its students. They're not funding it properly. So they are going to be required to address the school funding issue on the state level. Other states have had that verdict, and it takes a long time to get the state in a place where you can see significant changes. However, it is good news for public schools. Like, that's the ruling we want to hear. There's admittance that the state is not fairly and adequately funding our schools. So, I mean, to me, it's a good thing. And it is something that Governor Shapiro mentioned in his budget address. He specifically stated about that court case. So something that, we'll obviously keep an eye on. And each year as we're doing the budget, I will be updating everybody on changes that come to the funding formula, things like that. But there's no changes in place for 23-24. It's going to be the same funding formula that we see now, but hopefully funded at a higher rate. So, which we tend to be a school on the have-not side, which means that when there is more money put into it and run through the funding formula, we do get a piece of that pie. Some schools don't. Some schools actually lose money when more money is put out there, but we do receive some, thankfully.
Wish the state would go back to passing their budget so we could do our budget.
That'd be nice.
We can wish.
Not asking too much.
This is just a general question. What would happen if we had never procedurally passed this preliminary budget?
We could, if we didn't pass it, we lose our ability for referendum exceptions, which we weren't really looking at for this year anyway. So for anyone that doesn't know, that would be increasing the tax rate above and beyond the Act 1 index based on certain expenditures that are accepted above that. Other than that, we run into advertising requirements because we can make it public. I wish Attorney Beard was here to answer that question. I don't know legally what kind of problems we would run into outside of the fact that we have to have a budget past July 1st to then start making, we make large purchases over the summer to fund the upcoming school year. And without a budget in place, it really, would handcuff us as far as where we're going to spend and how we're going to spend it.
And Attorney Beard will be here, I think the 21st.
Yeah, I don't know the legal side of, unfortunately.
I would believe there would probably be some kind of pause on getting the state some level of.
Oh, yeah, they wouldn't fund us.
Yeah, they wouldn't
Yeah,
give us the
we-
money.
Just-
Yeah.
No,
I
like,
don't know, I just.
I think it's a
Yeah.
pretty good guarantee that the state would withhold funding until we passed it, which,
Okay.
I mean, I want to see that. That's 40%.
About grants, what would happen to grants? Would they would
I don't know the answer to that either. I did think about that though,
Yeah.
just because of the requirement and whether or not our federal funding would be
Sure.
impacted because of it.
Upstanding. That's a good point. Think about that.
Really want to find out?
No, I don't want to find out, but
Thank goodness, I don't.
Please don't. We don't.
I just want to know, like,
Yeah.
No, it's a good, I mean, it's good to know.
we need to know, like.
We as a school board, every year when we come to budget season, really do a good job at educating the community as to things that impact us. We did a big drive to impact or the impact of cyber education and those costs that literally we have no control over. And I think we do a great job being transparent with the community with our budget. I don't know what else we can do. I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
I assure you that door, I will, anybody that's listening to this, come ask Mrs. Ettinger. I will sit down with anybody. We will meet, we will talk, I don't want people to feel like, I believe why we're sitting here and why we are looking at tax increases, not to make it difficult for the public. We're trying, and it's why I keep preaching, we're going to reduce, because I'm trying to find that happy medium as we go over the next few years. So our public goes, okay, yep, this is where we're at. So I want to be clear and transparent. I will look at any line item with somebody and try and answer questions. I think it's important. This is our community. These are our families and our students.
Being the rookie at the table, it was nice to kind of get some information, kind of look into some of those, what's included in some of those budget items. And I definitely liked your breakdown you gave us for what we look like compared to
other
schools,
districts, yeah.
as well as the impact financially, whichever way we look, whether for tax increase or not a tax increase. I think that's important stuff to have.
If you look historically, I mean, Milton has been very fiscally sound. Whatever mixture of board members that have sat here over the years, we have an A+ rating. I mean, there's not a whole lot of schools, if you do your research, that can have that can claim that.
Derek, make sure you give Joel the chart that shows where we fall on tax rates compared to other local districts.
Yeah, I mean, you really
it's a
do
great
have to
chart
look
as
at
well.
that. Do we sit here and say, oh, yeah, let's just raise taxes to offset our deficit? The borough raises taxes, the county raises taxes. Why should this, I mean, the school, we have the same increases that you do as a homeowner, that every business has as a business, that every, government entity has that has to run their town, their township, their county. I don't think we don't max people out, but I think we ask for our fair share. I think some of my frustration as I have sat here as a board, is giving tax-free to businesses. I get very frustrated with that. I don't understand how these businesses come sauntering into town and say, hey, for 10 years, I don't want to give you anything. And then some other businesses will fight us. That's probably some of my biggest. I mean, it falls on the taxpayer's shoulders, the retired taxpayer's shoulders every year. And then we graciously vote, allow these businesses to not pay taxes. So we can only thank ourselves for not having those billions of dollars of revenue over the year, because we said, sure, just go open that business and sit around for 10 years and tell us that you're going to hire local people, and you never do. That, I would say, shame on us. We could be sitting here a lot more fiscally sound had we not just graciously given those millions of dollars away. I don't want to be on, but it's true.
Well, and we organized the committee, Dave Ettinger, myself, and all the township supervisors and the chamber to discuss the revenue issue that we have in this district. And none of them wanted to hear the problem.
Yeah, they
None
don't.
of them.
Nope, they didn't.
I mean, that's a bigger problem. Taxpayers should be upset because we're not getting our fair share from our businesses.
We already identified last meeting, right?
We did.
That's
Yeah.
potentially
It's a
extendable
lot.
after the 10 years is over, right?
Oh, so after the 10 years, they can fight the assessed value. They can appeal.
Right.
it. Yeah. There's nothing
Yeah.
It's a
restricting.
great can of worms.
Yeah,
And that's where,
It's
I
crazy.
talk about millage increases and how it's
Mhm.
lost revenue forever. And that's part of where, obviously I'm going to be very conservative and want to obtain as much revenue for the district as possible. Like that's what a business administrator should be doing. And I think you all understand that, but that's where to me, we only control the millage rate. That's it. We don't control the assessed values. So I have a constant fear of decreased assessed values, and we didn't change the millage rate. We
Right.
didn't increase it. Well, we lost our opportunity forever to offset that difference. And that's where I'm always going to fall on my belief as far as, we should go to the Act 1 index every year. And I mean, obviously it's your guys' decision, and whatever we decide, the district will work through it, and we'll make it work. Like, that's what we do. But that's where I look at it each year. It's like, can't do much about it. We can fight it. We can compromise, but there's only so much that we can control. And that's a little
What is the
bit.
average increase per month per county per person?
I was just gonna say that. So circling back,
Yeah.
you can raise taxes a little bit and not raise taxes according to this paper.
Union County, no matter what we do, our taxpayers in Union County are going to see, now again, their millage rate is going to decrease no matter what. They may pay more in taxes because their assessed value went up because they made improvements to their home, bought a. We don't control that.
It'll still be our fault.
It will still be our fault. In fact, their escrow can go up because their homeowner's insurance went up, but that'll be our fault. And I'll get the calls for that too, but that's fine. It's a chance to educate them. And so, yes, Eric, no matter what we do, if we go full Act 1 index increase, Union County is going to see a tax decrease because they did see an assessed value go up. And even Northumberland County, that full percentage, more than half are going to see less than $6 per month. It comes out to like what, $70, $72 annually. And I think I shared with you guys the last time, like $50 or less, it's like 2,300 of our taxpayers, like the big majority are going to see $50 per less per year. So I know sometimes people hear the numbers, they maybe not fully comprehend what we're talking about. But that's what the Act 1 index is there for. It's to limit it so that it's sustainable growth, and it's based on the average weekly wage. It's what people should be able to afford. Obviously, we'll have outliers, and that's always tough. And people are going to have a hard time, making ends meet. But for the most part, most of our community is going to be able to handle whatever we choose, whatever we decide to go with. So.
Bottom line is neither of these numbers cover your deficit.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
Well, and that's,
Where are you gonna
this
find
is all
extra
future
money in this?
planning. This is like when we did the 7-year projection and looked at it. This is one step towards an ultimate goal that's down the road, but we still have to do what we're talking about tonight and looking at areas where we can bring expenditures down while growing the revenue up.
Then we get that 7-year projection.
That's the
We're all
goal.
on track
That's the
with it.
goal. Nothing revenue wise is going to solve our deficit outside of a huge influx of state money, which
Mhm.
I'm not going to hold my breath. But other than that, no, I fully expect this budget year will pass with the deficit. We've passed it before with the deficit. We work hard then to reduce it and even watch our budget numbers as we go through the year and look for ways to save, even while the budget's in place. But no, I think we would be extremely hard pressed. I don't know that it's there to decrease to get rid of the deficit, but we can certainly lower it.
Mhm.
I think that's that's one thing I want the board to hear. It's our next step, even no matter what happens here tonight, we're going to go back to these numbers, and we're going to start, now that we've looked at things put out there, we're going to go back and we're going to start pulling things back, which is going to bring that 2.3 down. What that number is, do I think it's going to be 0? No, not even a chance, because that you're eliminating positions. You're only getting there that fast by eliminating positions, and we're not there. And I think that's why we project it out long term. How do we use our fund balance? But can we get there quicker, right? And to your point, it was when opportunities present themselves, how do we, position leaves, can we make it through as we make our changes instructionally? So
And let me be clear, I don't think it's a bad thing to use our fund balance to close the deficit. Like we have a larger fund balance than historically we've had. And I think a good use of that is to help us close the gap, give us some more time to close the gap. We're very fortunate that we have the fund balance that we have to even make this a possibility. So I like kind of a slow and steady wins the race. We work at reducing expenditures, we work on building up revenues, and then in time make it match. But we don't have to, attack it all at once, which would be a big pain for our district, certainly.
Any additional final questions?
Can we go back to revenues for a second?
Hmm?
I apologize if I missed this part.
You did, but it's okay. I would love to repeat
Sorry,
it.
I knew you'd love to do it again, Derek.
Let's talk about getting money. So
Yeah, I'd like to get the money in that. No. So I wanted to ask about the medical assistance reimbursement.
Yes.
That looks a lot higher, right? If I'm not mistaken from last year?
I think we had a 200,000
200.
withdrawal as well. Yeah.
Is that based on the services provided or the amount of kiddos that we have that are open under a Medicaid budget?
So we are bringing in about 80,000 to 90,000 in revenue through the services that we're providing right now. We have had a balance in that account for years. So we have purchased over the years strategically and actually allocated some of that money for the special ed facilitator's salary. So that overall balance is coming down. At some point, I think
This will
next
be the
year,
last budget
yeah.
year that you see that number. So you're actually going to see a decrease in that revenue by about 120,000. It's going to drop
Right.
down to the 80,000.
Okay.
So to give you an idea, and like Catherine touched on it, when I got here, as I learned more about school revenues and like was reviewing everything, I noticed we had almost $500,000 in access funds that should not be sitting, like they just collected and collected and collected and collected, never got pulled down. And then I think between Catherine, me, and then at that time, Dr. Keegan, it was like, well, let's get that. That's our money. Like, let's get our money. So this would be the last year of kind of getting that excess money. And then we would just be spending, we would be pulling down what we earn each year. So it would just become like a cyclical that come in, spend it. Yeah.
Okay.
all of the furniture that was purchased over the last probably 6 or 7 years for the special education programs district-wide came out of that money. So we've been spending down and it's about to end. So we average about 80,000 a year.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Just that number hit me. I'm like, wow.
That we did not
We do-
specifically cover that. So that was a good. That
We
was
do a very good job. I'll give
You do a
kudos
very
to
good
Tony
job.
Lightenberger, who's actually going to be our support staff of the month. She does a great job, and so do our service provider, speech, OTPT, nursing, to do the logs to get the money. Many districts have abandoned it, but it's certainly
We
something
earn
that
every
we,
dollar of that access
Yeah.
money. That is a lot of work.
I'm
yes.
sure.
But for the general public, just to be clear, asking the question, that's a reduction next year, but it's something you're aware of,
Yes.
you're accounting for, and it's not something that's catching us off guard in a year.
No, it'll go
Obviously.
right in that budget. It's very similar to, for board members who were here previously, we used to get reimbursement for some of our construction projects, the Plan Con. They used to be $270,000 per year in revenue. That's gone. So that ended either last year or the year before. So things like that, like programs that they put a moratorium on or stop, it's stops. So, I mean, things like that hurt, for sure.
They're just going to replace them with something better, right?
That's what the hope is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just have a different name.
And the other question I had was, how do we go about creating new revenue, like thinking outside of the box? One thing that comes to mind to me with the Bacher project is how do we fund some of our own projects? So I'm thinking of the lovely opportunity we have for advertising right along that crazy busy route, and thinking of like the billboards that we have at the Montandan exit. Why are we now?
It's a green throughway. You can't have billboard there.
Is there an end date to that though? Or no?
Not until Mrs. Thornburg dies. It's a clean highway.
She died.
Yeah, can't have any signs. Should have thought about that down around Harrisburg maybe, but from like Northumberland up.
What
no
about White
signs.
Deer? That's out.
Well, I don't know, but I know 147 or 180.
No.
Can't have it.
It's not
Right.
approved.
It's called the Clean Highway Act. Look it up.
Jeez.
And not until Governor Thornburg's wife dies.
We live next to 80, trust me, we've looked into it.
Yeah, I did too, and I
That
had
was
business over at the shoe factory. Tried, no.
You can park a trailer with a sign up there.
That's a way to think
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
That is
I
legal.
know, it's true. It's crazy, isn't it? Did you ever
That would
notice
be
there's no
building-
signs
Or somebody remember that down the road, advertising.
after she dies?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't, how old is she? Do you know?
It's gotta
Gotta
be.
be pretty old. Seriously, I mean, and then I'm not sure what it'll take when she does pass away, but that was the
That's
definite.
federal law too, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
You guys were quick on that.
I didn't.
Oh,
Telling you,
I
you're like,
tried.
no.
I tried. I had a business there, so
Down that road.
I was like, what? what they told me. I just never heard of such a thing.
Any others, Lindsay?
The only other question I had was with the capital campaign funds that are listed on here, is that like a set amount every year that we're drawing from, or is that, does that go
just a
back to
projection.
certain
That-
areas?
That's kind of in flux. That's the amount that I put in there, the amount that I expect that we'll draw down to pay for various capital things that are gonna be looked at for this year. But that's not, we could draw down more. And that's another one that I'm glad you pointed out, similar to access. We're not gonna see that every year. That's, as we draw those funds down, that money's.
And a lot of them are targeted and specified for certain things.
Yes.
It's not growing. I mean, it's really not an active.
I think it
No,
needs to be revamped.
It does
I mean,
need to be
Rocker
revamped.
has a lot of opportunities that I think we could really build on.
Back on that horse.
Fun.
Many of those donations were work items, so they're not cash value that you can draw from as well.
yeah, no, when we talk about the total value, that's not the total money available to the district. So now the money in the budget, that is money that's available that we can draw down through the year. But like when we say there was a goal of $1 million, there's not actually $1 million like available right now. A lot of those are in kind, or like Catherine says, some of those are not monetary donations. There are various other forms of donations. So that's where, but we'll see what I do is I look at the balance we have available in cash that we'll actually use toward the district. And then when we pull those down, it does go into our general fund revenue to be used for things. So it's not something I'd have to include in our budget, but I want to include it to give you guys an idea of what we're looking at.
So will that pull out then, like with the playground, when we get to Backer's playground, that 25,000 from the PTA that's
Yes.
added in there, that's gonna be kind of
Yes.
separate.
Yeah. That's not budgeted, but if that's a check that's cut to the Milton Area School District and then goes towards the playground, that would be a revenue we'd see. So just be an unbudgeted one.
While we're there, to your point, is our ultimate goal on April 4th is when the first home track meet occurs. We're going to close down phase 1 of the capital campaign and reaching the goal of $1 million and open up round. We're going to go in that direction in April, and it's going to connect back to the district's focus on what we can fund for the playground at Bacher, but then how do we bring our community in to help us expand that? So, which will hopefully be a cost savings inside of the Bacher project because of how we're going to attack it. We're going to announce that, sometime early spring.
And with that, one of the outcomes of the capital campaign was a recommendation for the district to sponsor or support a position that would be a developmental type of position that would eventually become its own, like the Dragon Foundation. So this board has, I think, twice now not had that conversation. That was a recommendation out of that committee, is that if we're thinking outside the box, sometimes you have to spend money to make some money. And I think that's a valid conversation that we need to have.
I disagree.
Alternate sources of revenue.
I like alternate sources of revenue, but I don't think we need to pay somebody to do that. I think we have plenty of
Who's gonna
brilliant
do it?
minds right here that can come up with ideas.
You gonna do it?
I just came up with one. It was the wrong one, but hey.
You and I, neither one of us have time to do grants.
We don't, but you know what? We fit everything else in. I might have time at the end of this year, so there you go.
Get off the board so we can employ you.
I am.
Okay.
Okay.
No, but I'm
We'll
not,
hire
I'm
you.
not working for the district. I don't.
So in hopes of approving the proposed preliminary budget this evening, I am going to make a motion to amend the agenda to add the approval of the proposed preliminary budget. Motion is being added in light of the meeting from the last regular meeting, the discussion that was had at the last regular meeting, as well as tonight's discussion. So that is a motion.
Motion is,
Second.
is there a second? There's a second. Are there any questions?
Again, this is just to add it to the agenda. It's
This is
not
not the.
anything else.
Right,
We're just adding it
adding
even
just
to vote on
adding
it.
to the agenda. Could we have roll call, please?
Would that allow public comment on adding to the agenda?
Yes, we do have
Yes,
to
we
allow.
do need, do we have any public comment on adding this item to the agenda?
I thought that was a waiver.
I'm sure he has come.
I'm sure. Okay, all right. So could we have roll call?
Sure. Mr. Frederick,
Yes.
Mr. Hosterman,
Yes.
Mr. Hunt,
Yes.
Ms. Kessler,
Yes.
Mr. Moser,
Yes.
Dr. Strasser,
Yes.
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Dr. Weaver,
Yes.
Mrs. Rance.
Okay, so now we have a motion. I would like to recommend that we approve the proposed preliminary fund budget.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Are there any questions?
Board comment.
Board comments? Any board comments on that?
No, only for F.
Okay, could we have roll call, please?
Mr. Frederick,
Yes.
Mr. Hosterman,
Yes.
Mr. Hunt,
Yes.
Ms. Kessler,
No.
Mr. Moser,
Yes.
Dr. Strasser,
No.
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Dr. Weaver,
Yes.
Mrs. Rance.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, so our work isn't over. We still have several months here to talk about this more, and we will be talking about more. So there's nothing else under Finance Committee this evening.
Or any comments or questions from board members?
I'll just point out again, I was just telling Lindsay, our problem with revenue is the assessed value in Northumberland County,
Yeah,
period.
the southern part.
Well, the whole county.
I know, but they haven't.
I mean, just looking at this median value
1972 was the last time they.
it's staggering. It's,
That's an increase from last year.
Then you.
no,
It's like $2,000 increase from last year.
I mean, any of us that live in Northumberland County and look at that number,
You're probably reassessed because you did things. You know, that's the only way that they reassess.
that is time.
Really?
I don't know.
Yeah,
Oh, I think the common
Right.
ratio.
I know, it's crazy.
Only because they're used to
All right, are there any comments from visitors this evening?
Mhm.
No comments?
I know changes.
All right, with that, motion to adjourn. Do we have any comments from anyone? Okay. Motion to adjourn meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor signify aye.
Aye.
See you next Tuesday.